One of the advantages to telling the truth is that you don't have to remember what you said. And that, God, that's worth listening to, because so there's a bunch of things I've learned as a clinician. And one of them is, because you're often in really weird situations with people if you're a clinician, because things happen that don't happen normally, and you don't know what to do. And so what I've learned is I just say what's happening, whatever it is, regardless of what it is. You know, I'll just try to describe it as accurately as I can, and not worry about, in some sense, not worry about the consequences. You know, like I'm not going out of my way to cause trouble, but if you're in a really, and I'm telling you, this can save your life at times, especially if you're dealing with someone who's paranoid, who's really paranoid. You do not lie to someone who's paranoid and violent, because as soon as you lie, you're aligned with the forces that are persecuting them. And they're going to be, because paranoia makes people hypervigilant, like they're on amphetamines. In fact, you can make people paranoid by giving them enough amphetamines. And you can make paranoid people more paranoid by giving them amphetamines. So they're hypervigilant because they feel that everything is predatory and against them. And so they're watching you like you would not believe, way more than you're watching them. And if you flicker a lie while you're talking to them, and they're really on the edge, you're done. So it's one thing to really know, if you're ever in a really bad situation and you don't know what to do, you tell the truth minimally. You don't disclose too much, that's just another lie. You tell the truth minimally and carefully and hopefully, and you might get out of it. You might get out of it. But if you falsify it, look the hell out. So the truth is a real mechanism of protection in dangerous situations. You know, so if someone's trying to intimidate you and you think they might get violent and they ask you if you're afraid, then you tell them that you're terrified and that you hope that things will go okay. Or you say, I'll give you an example. One time I was in an airport, and we were in this lineup to fly back to Canada that said international flights. And so it was a long lineup, like 50 people, and I got about 3 from the front. There were still like 40 people behind me, and the guy behind the counter decided that he was just going to shut down the line and that we could all go to this other line, which was like 300 people long. And I suggested that he not do that, because we'd been standing there for half an hour, and that he could just deal with the 20 of us that were left and like have a clue. And so he called the sheriff right away. And this was down in Florida, and it wasn't that long after 9/11. And so these guys came up, and they were armed. And they came and said, looked at me, because of course he'd told them that I was causing trouble, which I wasn't. I was just trying to not let, what would you say, an arrogant bureaucratic scum rat take advantage of me. So, which is not the same as causing trouble. So anyways, as soon as the cops came up, I said, look, I'm going to do exactly what you tell me to do right now, and I'm not going to cause any trouble. But I would like you to hear what actually happened. And so that's a good example of a situation like that. It's like, if someone's got you, no bravado. It's a very bad idea. And I was going to do exactly what they told me, because, you know, they didn't know who I was, and I didn't know what they had been told. So anyhow, the problem with lying is that it's a hydra. And kids find this out very early, because you tell one lie, and what happens is it has one of the consequences that you expect. Maybe you get away with it, but it has 3 or 4 others that you don't expect. And so it's like it grows some complexity. And then you have to tack a lie on each of those little complexity outcrops, and then they grow 3 more complexities, and soon this little lie turns into a great big ball of lies, and at some point it becomes painfully evident to everyone. And by that time, you're in such, you see this with politicians, like that guy who was sexting. Anthony Weiner, yeah, perfect name for him, man. It's so funny. I shouldn't make that comment because it's so obvious, but it's still funny. But, you know, that's exactly what happened to him. It's like, it wasn't even so much the event, because, you know, people are stupid, they make mistakes, and actually the public is somewhat forgiving if you say, yeah, geez, I'm a real moron, and, you know, like, really, seriously, how could I do that? But I did, and like, I'll try not to do it again. But what happens with politicians is, and I'm not speaking specifically of politicians, is they'll make an error and it gets exposed, and then they make 3 others trying to cover it up. It happened with Nixon, for example, and then the whole thing just turns into a complete scandal. And maybe they could have got out of it at the beginning by just telling the truth. It's like, yes, I'm an idiot, you know, I'll try not to do it again. Well, that isn't what happens in this case, and Pinocchio grows this elaborate series of lies, and the fairy is willing to be a little generous to him because he's little and cute and he's still a puppet, and she tells him not to do that, and that she's going to give him a pass this time, but that she isn't going to be able to intervene on his behalf again. And that's partly one of the things that's quite interesting about people who have Rousseauian ideas about children. So children are all good and they get corrupted by society, which is half true, because they're also not good and they get shaped and disciplined by society. But the Rousseauian types often are very interesting when their kids hit teenage years, or when they're judging, like, say, criminal teenagers. It's like the child is perfect until they hit like 11, then they turn into a teenager, and then they're like thugs. So they go from good to thug in one move, you know, and you often see that in families too, that have treated especially their daughters like a princess, you know, and then they hit puberty, and the parents who have princessed them to death have no idea what to do with them, and so then they become demonized, and so the overly good child turns into the overly wicked teenager, and sometimes they'll act that out too. One of the things I've seen with girls who are held in princess esteem when they're little and their parents have too tight a grip on them and too much of a demand for good behavior is they'll find some nasty character to associate with who will tear them out of the family. You know, bikers are really good for that sort of thing. So, and especially if you have some vengeful thoughts towards your parents. Nice biker is your perfect solution to that problem. Okay, we'll go through this scene and then I think we'll call it a day. Okay, so now Pinocchio's gone free. He's been united with his conscience. He's learned a couple of lessons. Don't be an actor and don't lie. And those things are quite similar, right? And especially once you're caught in your actor trap, don't lie to get out, because that will just make it worse. So that's the first of his trials, his moral trials on the road to becoming real. All right, now here we're in a different place. We're at this, I think it's called the Red Lobster Inn, and it's a shadowy place, right? And it's kind of cave-like, so it's like it's an underground entrance to somewhere that's not good. And so, and it's a foggy night, and you can't really see, so everything's murky and gloomy there. And so inside, we see the coachman and the fox and the cat. And the coachman's a bad guy. He's that mask that we saw. First of all, he's the archetype of that mask that was judgmental about Pinocchio having a voice. And it's like one of the things Jung said about the shadow, and this is, I would say, one of the primary impediments to enlightenment, is that if you start looking at your motives for misbehaving, and I mean by that something very specific. I mean, I don't mean that you're misbehaving by someone else's standards. I don't mean that. I mean, when you know by your own standards that you're doing something that's devious or malevolent or underhanded, you know it, and you still do it. So it's your own judgment you're bringing to bear on yourself. If you look at why you're doing that, the longer you look at it, the deeper a hole you dig. And so this is the motif of Dante's Inferno, fundamentally. So Dante's Inferno is a story about, I can't remember his name, unfortunately. Might be Dante, in fact, although I don't remember. He's led into hell by Virgil, who's an ancient philosopher, thinker. And hell has levels, and so the outer level is, and this is a Christianized version of hell, because there's hells of all sorts, but this is a Christianized version. And so on the outermost levels of hell, which is sort of like normal life, are the ancient philosophers, and they're still in hell because they weren't Christian, but it's kind of like, it's like cheap motel hell instead of the full pit thing, you know. And so then Dante goes deeper and deeper into hell until he gets right to the bottom of it. And it's been a while since I read it, but if I remember correctly, Satan himself is encased in ice at the bottom of hell, surrounded by people who betray others. And so Dante's notion was that the worst of all possible violations of moral behavior was betrayal, and that they're in the deepest levels of hell. And I really like that idea. I think it's true, because if you trust me, then you're manifesting the necessary courage that puts someone through life. You know, if you're smart, you don't trust me because you're naive. You trust me knowing that I'm full of snakes and so are you, but maybe we could cooperate and move things along nicely, you know, and we could reduce each other to the word, to our word, and we could cooperate. But you're awake, you know, and then I betray that, then I'm undermining your necessary faith in life and humanity. And you can really hurt someone that way. Like sometimes it's self-betrayal, but you can really do someone in that. We can really traumatize them. So that they can't recover. And so it's a really terrible thing to do to someone. And maybe it's the worst thing, and that was Dante's idea. And it's tied in. That makes very interesting reading if you read it at the same time as Milton's Paradise Lost, because those are metaphysical explorations. This is what they are. They're metaphysical explorations of the terrible places you can end up, and that people do end up. And also a metaphysical explanation of what spirit takes you there. So, because you might ask, well, why do you betray someone? And that is a deep question. And so you'll have your specific reasons, but under that there'll be some other reasons, and under that there'll be some other reasons, and under that there'll be some other reasons. And if you go all the way to the bottom, you come up with the ultimate reasons why you betrayed someone. And when you look at that, that will not be pretty. That's when your proclivity for evil, let's say, unites with the general human proclivity for evil, and you discover just exactly what you're capable of. And so Jung's notion was that, well, that was a full encounter with the shadow, which is, I suppose, partly what this course is about, because one of the things that I believe I told you at the beginning was that I was going to try to help you understand how it might be that you could be an Auschwitz guard. And to really understand that, that's a horrifying thing to understand. But I'll tell you, if you want to grow some teeth, that's a really good thing to understand. So we were talking about your capacity to negotiate before. Like if you aren't a monster, you cannot negotiate. But if you've got that under control, then you don't have to be a monster. It's really paradoxical. So if you're just naive, well, you end up in jail and a marionette master has control over you. That's not helpful. So that's not good. That just means you're useless and you can be manipulated. You won't go out of your way to be malevolent, but it's mostly because you just don't have the skills, the organizational skills, or even the depth to do that. You know, you're good because you're harmless. That's not good. That's easily manipulated. And so you think, well, how do you get out of that? Well, partly you watch people because you know what they're like, because you know what you're like, but you also know what you could do and would do if you were pushed. And so you don't have to show much of that when you're negotiating with someone for them to take you really seriously. So it's a strange thing, you know, but one of the things Jung pointed out too was that what you most need to know will be found where you least want to look, and that's because you haven't already looked there. And so it's a little different for everyone, right? Because your particular place you don't want to look isn't going to be the same as your place, but you're going to have a place you don't want to look, and what you haven't discovered, that's where it is. And so that's all partly going to be discovered by you looking at what you're capable of, what you're truly capable of. And you know, people, especially on the compassionate end, think, well, no, I could never be like brutal like that. And that could be true, but you can kill people with compassion, no problem. That's the Freudian Oedipal situation. So think about working in a nursing home. So there's actually a rule of thumb, which I also use to guide my interactions with children and also with my clients, and I would say with people in general. Do not do anything for anyone that they can do themselves. All you do is steal, you just steal it from them. So imagine you're working with really elderly people, you know, they have Alzheimer's. It's like really easy to do things for them because, well, it isn't, because it's really a hard job. But it might be easier to do something for them than to let them struggle through it. But you just speed their demise, right, by taking away the last vestiges of their independence. And you do the same thing with kids. It's like, struggle through it, man.